A police officer receives internal documents recommending the termination of an SAPS contract for reasons of corruption. Now, minutes later, what does he do with that contract, with that message? He sends it on to the very contractor whose deal is about to collapse. Now, we're talking here about channel favorite Vusimusi cat Matlala and the police officer involved in sending on the recommendation letter. That is Sergeant F.E. Nkosi, otherwise known as Fannie Nkosi, and he has been unmasked. He was previously Witness F, but a ruling was made today that we are allowed to refer to him by his full name. There is also another senior police general whose name appears over and over again. Channel favorite, Lt-Gen Shadrack Sibiya. I always get very nervous when Shadrack Sibiya enters the fray, and tonight's episode, it's going to be explosive because we are going to be going over all the contradictions between Sibiya's testimony and Fannie Nkosi's testimony. Now, the question that we need to ask is simple. Was this simply information sharing, or was it a warning for Cat Matlala, warning him that his contract was about to go, his money was about to become non-existent? We examine how internal police information traveled through an unusual network of officers, contractors, and intermediaries. And the picture of the Big Five is slowly starting to emerge. Now, thank you for watching. My name is Carri, and it is a pleasure to have you with me on my channel. If you don't mind, it would be if you please hit that subscribe button, also that like button. It just helps with the YouTube algorithm. So, according to the testimony, Sergeant Fannie Nkosi communicates frequently with Vusimusi cat Matlala. They communicate frequently on WhatsApp. They share contract updates as well as payment discussions and operational information. At one point, Cat Matlala sends Sergeant Fannie Nkosi screenshots showing SAPS payment confirmations. And this is where it gets super sus. The message reads, this is from Cat, "Maybe it will reflect tomorrow," followed by another message. "Yes, it is paid on 24 November. Deposit will probably be tomorrow." Then Effie Nkosi replies, "Please, my brother," with the hands, the prayer hands. When questioned about this message in front of the commission, because what was he saying, "Please, my brother," for? It sounds as though he was perhaps going to get a little bit of a cut of that money. He says, "I don't know what I meant. Can't remember." It's a very common theme of amnesia that goes around the commission witnesses, as well as this common theme of destroying their phones and not backing up their chats. Now, basically, Sergeant Nkosi also insists that this message had nothing to do with me. But investigators immediately point out something very unusual. Nkosi forwards the payment screenshots to channel favorite Lt-Gen Shadrack Sibiya. If this message had nothing to do with him, why did he send it on to a senior police general? This is when the pattern becomes clear, because throughout the testimony, Nkosi repeatedly describes himself as just passing on information. Examples include payment screenshots, contract updates, as well as internal SAPS communications. At one point, he explains, "I just passed on the message because some information he shared is simply not public. It included internal SAPS audit findings, among other things. Now, this is a critical point in the timeline because the SAPS, they conduct an internal audit on Matlala's Medicare 24 Swane contract. The audit produces a recommendation. The contract should be terminated. The reason listed on the document: possible fraud or corruption in the procurement process. If I was Brigadier Rachel Macheng, I would be worried by this finding. This recommendation is circulated internally among senior SAPS officials, so it wasn't available for the public. And the document is clearly marked confidential. Yet, according to what came out today, Sergeant Nkosi receives this internal information and then he sends it on to Matlala. When questioned about this decision, Nkosi gives a surprising explanation. He says, "I did not see the danger of sharing it because I thought it was already in the public domain." And this claim was challenged because the document he sent was an internal SAPS report. Now, he would explain, I think he was taking a leaf out of the disbandment letter. You know, when that 31st of December disbandment letter was shared on social media, it was also circulated among certain people. And when asked about it, when they appeared in front of the commission, they said, "Hey, we got it from social media." Now, I think Sergeant Nkosi has taken a leaf out of their book because he said he had heard about the contract termination on Facebook, and he tells the commission, "I saw it on Facebook." He claims that because this information was already circulating online, he believed that sharing an internal audit document was simply harmless. But there is a key detail that is pointed out to him. The contractor could not know for certain whether the social media rumors were true or not until Sergeant Nkosi sent him that document, which effectively confirmed that his contract was under threat of termination. This testimony also reveals a crucial sequence known as the 72-hour influence chain. And it is important when looking at these things to see what is happening within the network, to see who is seeing who and what is going on. So rumors begin circulating about the source of the contract termination, and this is on social media. What happens is then an internal SAPS communications letter confirms that the contract is recommended for cancellation due to corruption or fraud. Then Sergeant Nkosi receives the documents and forwards it on to Matlala. Nkosi then also shares this information with someone else, Steve Matsumi. Now, Steve Matsumi, we've looked into him on the channel before. He is looking more and more like an alleged or potential cartel member. His name just keeps popping up over and over again. And he basically owns a security company. We looked into that security company. It doesn't have any news stories associated with it. And oftentimes, according to General Kamalu's testimony, when you want to join the cartel, you've got to register a security company. And then after that, you have access to weapons. We also looked at his property portfolio, which is quite extensive in Bedfordview, nice area in Johannesburg to live. Now, Steve Matsumi is another individual who is connected to this network. Why did Steve Matsumi receive this document from Sergeant Nkosi? Because remember, Sergeant Nkosi forwarded it on to Matlala as well as Steve Matsumi. The simplest explanation would be that Steve Matsumi was involved in it somehow. But according to F.E. Nkosi, he says that he believed Matlala owed Matsumi money. So informing him about the contract might help him understand whether repayment was possible. Now, another pattern emerges in the testimony, a meeting pattern. They investigators identify at least 12 meetings between Effie Nkosi and Steve Matsumi. I refer to him Effie Nkosi because that's how he is written on my whiteboard of all these names in the commission. His name first came up in General Khumalo's testimony and it was referenced as Effie Nkosi. So please forgive me if I do that. It's just how I've been staring at the whiteboard all these past months. Now, 12 meetings are identified between Steve Matsumi and Sergeant Fannie Nkosi, and the time frame is March 2024 to September 2025. Now, Sergeant Nkosi says that these messages were super casual. You know, he was referred to as 007, he was referred to as Knight Rider, and he said, look, I was just teaching Steve Matsumi how to ride a motorcycle. But investigators notice something else. These meetings involve entry codes to secure locations, coordination with other police officers, as well as extended visits during working hours. Some codes allowed access for several hours. Now, was this motorcycle lessons? Because, I mean, surely to teach someone to ride a motorcycle, you'd need to be outside. You wouldn't need to be in a secure room. And Sergeant Nkosi responds, I was teaching him how to ride after he bought his first bike. And then we have to go on to the jet ski incident. So much happened today. So remember, a bank card was found in Cap Matlala's jet ski. This is according to Sergeant Fannie Nkosi's testimony the last time he appeared. Now, the jet ski had been retrieved from Cap Matlala's farm, and basically in his first round of testimony, Fannie Nkosi states that the card was discovered on the 23rd of December 2024. But when questioned further today, he admitted something else. He cannot be certain when the card entered the jet ski. He said it's possible that the card had been there since September. Now, why is Sergeant Fannie Nkosi such an important witness? It is because he plays a central node in the alleged network. He is the one that connects senior police officers with these so-called businessmen who are involved with all these tenders. And we're going to go through it quickly. So he has a network and he appears at the center of all these interactions. Now, to understand who he is involved with, we need to go through the relationships quickly one by one. So first of all is Sergeant Nkosi and Kat Matlala. So they are messaging all the time. Information is flowing both ways between the two. They are WhatsApping each other. They are doing payment updates with each other, contract complaints, meeting coordination, operational discussions, all of that. And he's the one who's sharing this confidential information with Kat Matlala, whose contract is about to be cancelled. Now, Sergeant Nkosi says this is just passing messages, and this communication is flowing both ways. Then we have Sergeant Nkosi and Shadrack Sibiya. Sibiya is one of the most senior officials that has been implicated at the Matlala Commission, and between the two of them is payment screenshots being forwarded on to Sibiya, forwarding internal SAPS communications, discussions about contractors' complaints with the Medicare 24 contract, and meetings involving the contractor. These two men seemed very deeply invested in not getting Kat Matlala's contract cancelled, perhaps because they had something to gain, something to benefit from that contract. Then we have Sergeant Nkosi and Steve Matsumi. So we have those 12 meetings that occurred when Sergeant Nkosi said that he was teaching Steve Matsumi how to ride a bike. They only become in contact with each other once Kat Matlala is arrested. And oftentimes what happens is a pattern. We will have Sergeant Nkosi going to Steve Matsumi to have a meeting. And then after that, there's some sort of police activity that happens afterwards. For example, there was plates that were searched, and Nkosi couldn't do it himself because his access had been removed. So he asked a colleague to do it. Now, this is important because they were not in communication when Kat was still around. But as soon as he was arrested, then it switched to Steve Matsumi. So this is very interesting here. Why did it switch? What were they having meetings about? Nkosi says the relationship is personal. They are friends. Now, there are these secure entry codes that are sent before meetings. Other police officers sometimes attend. Some meetings take place during work hours, and multiple officers travel to meet Steve Matsumi. Now, Steve Matsumi came up in that message when General Nkosi was allegedly threatening General Sonona. Remember that message that came up at the Matlala Commission, and they unmasked it. And basically, General Nkosi allegedly said to General Sonona, "Are you scared of Sibiya and Steve Matsumi?" So it's interesting development here with Steve Matsumi. Now, we also have Sergeant Nkosi with investigating officers. So, for example, in that case with Musa Kawula, who was that blogger who they had arrested, Sergeant Nkosi is acting with the investigating officer on the case. And he is also interacting with other officers involved in organized crime operations. In one sequence, Kat Matlala sends Sergeant Nkosi profiling reports, consumer trace reports, and identity documents and arrest warrants. And Nkosi confirms receiving the information. Investigators then ask, why was the civilian complainant sending investigative documents directly to a police officer? And also, in several instances, Kat Matlala himself appears to be requesting updates, suggesting investigative steps, as well as coordinating actions, especially with regards to Musa. At one point, there was even a remark that it appears as though Kat was in the driving seat, and Sergeant Nkosi did not accept this characterization, but he acknowledged that Kat Matlala was frequently providing information and requests. So when we map these interactions described in the testimony, a pattern emerges. Information appears to move among a consistent path. There we have Kat Matlala, then we have Sergeant Nkosi, then we have these senior SAPS officials, such as Shadrack Sibiya and Richard Shabiri. And then after that, in some cases, we have the information flowing back down from the SAPS senior officials to Sergeant Nkosi, and then onwards to the contractor and associates, Steve Matsumi and Kat Matlala. This role has a specific name. It is a bridge node. A bridge node is something that connects two otherwise separate groups. And this is why his testimony is so important. In this case, the police institution and the alleged businessmen, alleged cartel members appear as separate actors when they are only being connected by F.E. Nkosi. Now, across the testimony from the Matlala Commission, I have said that all roads, they lead not to Rome, but back to Kat. And Kat Matlala appears more and more to be the central node. Remember, Sergeant F.E. Nkosi is the bridge node, and Kat Matlala is the central node. Across the testimony, almost every relationship, message chain, financial flow, or meeting ultimately connects back to Kat Matlala. The network structure emerging from the evidence looks something like as what on the screen. Now, there are also financial links. Nkosi admitted to receiving money from Kat Matlala as well as from Steve Matsumi. But Matsumi's financial dispute also involves Kat Matlala. In one message, according to F.E. Nkosi, it was said that Kat must start paying me, according to Steve Matsumi. So all the financial relationships also converge on Kat Matlala. And Nkosi possessed Matlala's credit card. Remember that credit card he allegedly found in Kat's jet ski. And he claims Kat left it in his jet ski. He used it to buy repair materials to repair, was it Kat's boat or his jet ski? I can't remember. Kat, remember, said his boat engine. And I think Sergeant Nkosi said the jet ski. They can't even get their story straight. But other testimony suggests that the card may have been left there for Fannie Nkosi to use intentionally. Again, the financial evidence goes back to Kat. Now, messages about that 360 million rand SAPS contract involved Kat sending payment screenshots. We saw this with Suleiman Karim as well, where money was flowing between the two. And Nkosi was forwarding them to police officials, these proof of payments, and Nkosi was sharing that termination information with Kat Matlala. So the contractual flow of information runs through Kat Matlala. Kat is also linked to these multiple SAPS officials. He's linked to Shadrack Sibiya, General Shibiri. Remember General Sonona? He's also linked to him. In his testimony, Richard Shibiri allegedly received 70,000 rand from Kat, and Kat reportedly had inside knowledge of the payment processing system. Kat is also connected to Steve Matsumi and the late Mswazi, otherwise known as Mr. Msibi, who was the alleged CEO of the Big Five, and he passed away. Both of these relationships also intersect directly with Fannie Nkosi. The evidence suggests that police actions sometimes occurred in relation to Kat's interests. These involve forwarding contract information, sharing media queries, communications about payments, as well as alleged warning on termination. This is why Commissioner Beloy, I love her, she said something very interesting today. It suggests that you are much more interested in Mr. Matlala's contract. It looks like our contract. And why is she saying this? Because it looks from the way everyone is interacting here that they had a stake in the outcome, a personal stake in the outcome. They perhaps had something financially to gain. And this combination can raise questions about why they did everything that they did. And it all comes down to greed. So there were also a bunch of contradictions that came out today with regard to Shadrack Sibiya's past testimony. So in Sibiya's version of him knowing Kat Matlala, he minimizes the relationship. He repeatedly framed Kat as a stakeholder, a service provider, and he stated that Kat is not my friend. And according to Sergeant Nkosi's testimony, they had frequent meetings with Kat Matlala, social interactions, sharing of internal SAPS information, regular meetings. And this basically seems as though Kat Matlala had ongoing informal access to police officers. Now we have to talk about Sibiya's son's engagement party event, because this was at Sibiya's home, and present were a bunch of people. General Sentamule, General Shibiri, Sergeant Nkosi, Matlala, Kat Matlala, and Shadrack Sibiya, obviously. And we have that WhatsApp message saying that Kat has arrived here, or that other one that was asked Kat to make a turn. Now, commissioners suggest that the messages imply that Richard Shibiri expected Kat Matlala to be present, and this suggests some level of pre-coordination. However, Sibiya in his testimony says that he does not know why Richard Shibiri would expect Kat Matlala, and he does not recall any conversation between them. And then Sergeant Nkosi comes up with a different pattern. He suggests that these individuals, by their evidence, were already communicating regularly. And the idea that Sibiya was unaware of the relationship is difficult to reconcile with the communication chain. Also, it is in doubt when Sibiya first met Kat. I told you guys they were been friends for long, I think in my own opinion, long before Sibiya said so. And there is a contradiction that appears in Sibiya's own testimony, but becomes relevant when compared with Sergeant Nkosi's timeline. So basically, We know that Sibiya made that mistake when he appeared before Parliament and then when he appeared at the Commission. And he gave 2 different dates for when he met Kat Matlala. Evidence presented today by Sergeant Nkosi in the messages suggested that the 2 were in communication much long before Sibiya first said that they were. There is also evidence linked to the famous impalas, and according to Sergeant Nkosi, those impalas were meant for Sibiya from Kat Matlala, and they were in fact delivered. Sibiya says he never received them. Remember, he gave his testimony and he was like, I don't want anything to do with these impalas. They must go away. I don't want any gifts or anything. Now, there was also mention of the Vusimusi saga this morning, as well as Z, that businessman who has been labeled in witness F Sergeant Nkosi's phone as ZEFF. And even today, witness F, Sergeant Nkosi, was very evasive about that. He didn't want to admit how he knew him. Remember, they were allegedly coordinating the arrest of Vusimusi because of all those stories he was writing about Z's, as well as Kat Matlala, and him, putting him in the public eye. Now, after that, Vusimusi, we know he was put in jail and he has since been released on bail. But I find it interesting that this man has 2 murder investigations against him, and they only put him in jail when he became a threat to allegedly Kat Matlala. Now, when more information emerges, we'll get into all of that. Now, comment below, did I miss anything? What did you find most interesting about today's testimony? Sergeant Fannie Nkosi is back on the stand tomorrow, and yeah, things are starting to heat up for him, like they have all the other witnesses and the commission. They come in very confident and they leave a little bit defeated. Now, if you've gotten to the end, thank you for watching. Thank you to all my members. You support the plant fund behind me. They are looking so beautiful. Thank you to all my subscribers. We are almost on 25,000. And if you haven't, it would be a great honor to me if you would hit that subscribe button. And thank you to all my viewers. You make this possible.